Welcome to this meeting of the Westwood Planning Board. We will begin the meeting with a roll call vote. If everyone could raise their hand and indicate they're here. Mr. McCusker?
Here.
Mr. Paff?
Here.
Mr. Gotti?
Here.
And Ms. Conant?
Yeah, I just can't get my video to go on, but I'm here.
Thank you. And I'm David Atkins. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. There you are. We also have Town Planner Abby McCabe, our Recording Secretary Jessica Cole, and our Director of Community and Economic Development Nora Locknane, our Town Council Pat Ahern, and Westwood Media Center is recording and live casting this meeting. So welcome everyone. All meetings of the Planning Board are recorded by Westwood Media Center and broadcast live on local cable television, Comcast Channel 12 and Verizon Channel 42. Meetings are also available on the Westwood Media Center YouTube channel and are live streamed. If you're having any trouble logging into Zoom, please go to zoom.us and click on Join Meeting and enter the meeting ID, which is 863-9049-9476. While people are unmuted, please turn off your cell phone ringers to eliminate background noise. We'll start the meeting with the board members and planning department staff unmuted and on video. And as the chair recognizes individuals to speak, we will unmute them. Board members may choose to mute themselves when they're not speaking in order to minimize background noise. Tonight's meeting of the Planning Board is a public hearing to review the zoning articles that have been proposed. That tonight we will go through those articles and make a recommendation to FinCom, and then continue this public hearing to the FinCom meeting on March 8, where there will be continued discussion and public hearing. The process this evening is that we're going to go through the articles one by one, and we will have a introduction. The town planner will present the article. I'd like to put it up on the screen if there's anything to show that's helpful for seeing the text of that. And after there's a presentation on the article, we'll see if there's any board member comments, and then we'll go to take public testimony. So the process, what I'd like to suggest is that people use the Q&A part to indicate that they would like to speak on a particular article. Then I'd like to recognize them to actually speak. If there's someone who's having difficulty, they can't get in to Zoom in that manner, then we would take Q&A comments at the very end after we've heard all the people who want to speak. So let's see, to begin this process, there's no other, the only other item on the agenda this evening is approval of some meeting minutes. So it's primarily the public hearing on these town meeting articles. And as I described, I'm going to go through one at a time, present them, take public comment, and then the board will discuss if there's any changes or additions or anything before taking a vote to recommend whether to send it on to FinCom. And then we'll go to the next item in the list and work our way through like that. So the first article, or the first thing that we have on the agenda is a zoning map amendments related to the Obed Baker House. And so Nora, I think you have an update for us on that article first.
I do. So the Obed Baker House has two warrant articles that were requested by the select board. One of them is a zoning amendment warrant article. Both are related to a proposal that was received from Todd Sullivan in response to a request for proposals that we put out in the beginning of 2020. We had a meeting with Todd on Thursday with staff from DPW and Department of Community and Economic Development. And we all acknowledged, including Todd, that he's just not ready to go forward. He still has more work to do on his design. before he can proceed to the next stage, which is the selectmen's consideration of his proposal. So he's going to take a step back, take more time to work on the proposal. And on March 8th, I'm going to request that the select board withdraw both articles from the spring town meeting and then reconsider them at a future town meeting. So there's no reason for the planning board to consider this article.
Abby, you know you're
It will
sharing.
be withdrawn. We're not going to go forward with this.
Okay, so Abby, you're you're sharing the screen, and so on this first item that's listed on the agenda, so it's not going anywhere at this moment. So
Not for the spring town meeting. So it may come back at a future town meeting. We're still looking at the proposal, and Todd is still designing his ideas about what he wants to do, but it will not be coming up for spring 2021.
all right, so there's no action for the planning board tonight on this item, unless anyone has anything else. We'll move on to the Article 2, temporary uses and structures. And Abby, if you could remind us of, if you want to give an outline of this article.
Sure. The second article, or it's the first planning board's article. We've been calling it temporary uses and structures. This article, the purpose of this article is to allow an administrative approval permitting process for uses that are temporary in nature, less than 6 months, to be brought forward and for an applicant, if they're looking for a use that's less than 6 months, can apply directly to the building commissioner for a building permit. If you recall the zoning bylaw, what we have on the screen now is the existing zoning. It's the zoning use chart where it talks about temporary structures and uses. Right now, if anyone has any proposals that are temporary, not permanent, it's required to go through the zoning board special permit public hearing process. The building commissioner brought to our attention recently that he does receive a number of requests for uses that are very short-term in nature, sometimes for an event that may only be a day or a weekend or a week long, such as recently we experienced this past year with outdoor dining. So maybe possibly an outdoor sales or an event, an art event, or using some kind of special event. And the special permit process with the zoning board is at least usually about 3 months long. So he brought to our attention that for some of these very short uses, it's not worth the time for an applicant to go through that long process. So this article proposes adding a footnote to the table shown in red. It's this little 12 right here. And then it adds for uses that are proposed for less than 6 months can apply directly to the building commissioner for a building permit, which allows an administrative approval for a short-term use or structure. So that might be a structure, could be something like a tent or use of an area or use of a parking lot or something. And they would have to submit plans to the building commissioner outlining the proposal, the hours of operations, and the parking needs. That would also require staff to review it, and the building commissioner would have to review and approve that. And the way it's written, it also allows for the building commissioner to grant one extension so that it's never more than 1 year. So essentially, this is allowing another path forward without going through the zoning board's special permit process. If anyone has any further questions.
Thank you, Abby. Anyone also in the any attendees could click on raise your hand or indicate in the Q&A that you'd like to speak while I ask the board members if any of them have any clarifying questions or anything. Scotty.
Just the examples that Joe gave when he came to us were things like sidewalk sales and those types of things for existing retail uses, really. I mean, those were the most commonly cited requests he gets, right?
Yep.
See any other questions? And I don't see anyone with their hand raised, and I don't see, just checking, I don't see any comments from the Q&A. So does anyone have any changes to propose, or are we ready to recommend this article to FinCom? Would someone like to make a motion to recommend that this article, to recommend, how technically this is the stage we're simply sending it. We don't do the formal recommendation to town meeting, but we are recommending that FinCom, well, we're recommending it to FinCom, right?
Yes. Your recommendation is a recommendation for favorable action to FinCom.
I'll make a motion that we forward Article 2 for favorable recommendation to FinCom on temporary uses and structures.
Second.
All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion? So on a motion by Mr. Gotti, seconded by Mr. Paff, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Gotti,
Yes.
Mr. McCusker,
Yes.
Mr. Paff,
Yes.
Ms. Conant,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So we will recommend Article 2 to FinCom. Moving on to Article 3. Abby, you want to?
Sure. So Article 3, this is a resubmission of your article last year. Last year, it was bumped from the town meeting warrant due to the reduced quorum requirements with COVID-19. But essentially, this article prohibits the firearms and explosive sales use in the local business A and the local business B districts. That's your High Street and your Washington Street business districts. The intent and purpose of this change is because it's not the desired use that you want in your downtown areas. It's not generating that pedestrian foot traffic that you desire. So right now, it's currently allowed in your 2 local business districts, also by special permit. The BA in the chart means a zoning board special permit. It's currently also allowed in the highway business and the industrial zone. That's the HB and the I in the chart that's on the screen. This article proposes prohibiting it in the 2 local business districts, but it remains a special permit allowed use in the highway business and the industrial zone. If you have any other questions.
And thank you. Are there any questions from anyone? All right. Is there anyone, if anyone would like to comment on this from the public, raise your hand or enter something in the Q&A. Just checking to see. We have 13 people. We have 13 attendees here. Just looking, seeing nobody raising their hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any public desire to speak on this one. So if there are no changes anyone wants to make, could someone make a motion like we did before?
I'll make a motion that the planning board move forward on Article 3 in favorable action, article relative to firearms and explosive sales and service.
Second that.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Mr. Ahern, did you want to say something, or you just turned your video on? We're not getting your audio, so if you...
I was just able to turn my video on. I had a little technical glitch early on.
Okay.
Pardon me.
All right, thank you. Well, it's good to know we've got the audio working. All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll have a roll call vote on favorable recommendation of this article to the FinCom. I'm just checking again. No, nobody wants to comment on it, so we'll go through a roll call vote. Mr. Paff?
Yes.
Ms. Conant?
Yes.
Mr. Gotti?
Yes.
and Mr. McCusker,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So that article is recommended to FinCom. The next item, Abby, is
Right. The next Article 4 is related to the medical uses. The planning board has talked about this a couple times before, but we've never made it all the way through to adoption. So in the fall, I had convened a group of residents to serve as an advisory panel that would work over the last several months or last few months to evaluate the zoning and propose a new zoning amendment to bring forward to the planning board. The group I convened was 8 residents in town, including 2 planning board members, Chris Paff and Rob Gotti. So Rob Gotti is going to share his screen and run through the details of the zoning, what we looked at, and review the details of the zoning proposal.
Rob, you're muted.
Yep, thank you. I just wanted to get everything squared away on the screen here. So are you able to see my screen, or are you seeing the presenter notes here?
we're looking at presenter mode.
Presenter mode.
One second, let me flip that. And let's see here. Swap displays, if I can move this thing here. There we go, switch displays. Okay, now you should be able to see it.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So for the benefit of everybody that was involved in that advisory panel that Abby convened, we wanted to bring people in because oftentimes when somebody comes in from the public, they're not as familiar with all of the details, and we thought we would bring them up to speed on how zoning can really be a proactive planning tool for the community. And so we start with just a bit of a primer here in terms of what is zoning here in Westwood. It's sort of a 3-system checks and balances, not unlike the federal government, where the planning board is sort of the legislative body. We create and carry out the policy. We create the zoning recommendations that get adopted at town meeting, and then we hear and rule on special permits. The zoning board of appeal, they're the judicial branch. They sort of adjudicate any challenges to those rules. And then Abby and Joe Doyle, the building commissioner and town planner, are the enforcement arm of the regulation, and other special permits or variances that are requested. So a couple of key concepts to this is the first is zoning properly done allows us to retain control. You know, it allows us to define how property may be used. It also it says where that can be used, those defined uses. And so the second concept is when we fail to plan, we should plan to fail. And so what I mean by that, absence of a zone being defined and specified where a defined use may locate doesn't mean that it can't locate here in town. In fact, it just means the opposite. It means it can locate anywhere here in town. And this concept will be key when we get into sort of the bones of this conversation. There were really sort of 2 eras of medical zoning here in Westwood, pre and post University Station. Pre, everything was really one use term. It was the office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on premise. As University Station was developed, there were then 3. There was the continuation of the office of doctor or dentist. There was the creation of an office of a healthcare professional, and then there was a medical center or clinic. Now, when that last one was created, in the University Station UAMUD, the University Ave multi-use district, basically that there were 2 definitions or terms that were created and excluded explicitly. So they weren't created as definitions. They were hospital and substance abuse treatment facility. So the working group that Abby talked about that she convened really represented a great cross-section of fellow residents. We had representation from Islington and East Street, Downey area, University Station, Martha Jones, High Street area. And then the experience was the other piece that added to really rich conversation around these discussions. We had members of public safety, nursing, we had a mental health professional, we had individuals that were in the commercial real estate space, other business folks, and then experienced zoning personnel as well. So how did we sort of get everybody familiar? Well, we said, all right, let's first assess the need. Let's review the current definitions of zoning and the districts that we have and the specifications within. Then there's Mass General Law 40 and the notion of protected classes, which is relevant here. So then the key question is, do we want to retain control, or do we want to run the risk that this could be placed anywhere? If we want to retain control, are there areas where these uses shouldn't be allowed? And then what are the options that remain once those areas that everybody agreed upon that where it shouldn't be allowed, what's left? And then are there other considerations that we need to take into account before making any recommendations? All of that led to the original recommendation of the warrant article as it was written. So just grounding everybody, this familiar boomerang here is Westwood over, just a base perimeter map. The majority of Westwood is zoned as residential, right? The white areas are the only areas that are not residential. When you get into stripping away those residential areas, you're left with really very little land relative to the size of the town as to where non-residences can be permitted. And then that created the need, as we continue to need to grow, to create mixed use overlays, a la University Station and some of the other areas in town as well. So we talked about Mass General Law 40A, and specifically Section 3 that talks about protected classes of citizen. And we had, you can't discriminate against the disabled person. And we have rulings, interpretations from special counsel that says it is very, very likely that the AG would rule that a substance abuse facility is a protected class. So, as I mentioned earlier, when the University Station overlay district was created, it specifically excluded hospitals and substance abuse facilities. So that left us exposed. So now the next question is, okay, how did we get there? And so we have sort of a couple of different things that we're trying to address here. We have undefined uses with designated zones. The office of doctor or dentist is currently not defined in the definition section, but it's basically throughout the table of uses. You have defined uses without designated zones. We have the office of a healthcare professional. While it's defined by the definition section of the zoning law, it's not specified in the table of use chart as to where it is and isn't allowed. And the medical center or clinic is defined, and it's allowed at University Station currently, but there were these two additional undefined uses that were referenced in that are not defined, nor does it specify where they are or are not allowed. But by creating the reference to them where they were not allowed at University Station, that essentially created the definition. So we need to make a formal definition on those things and then zone where they're permitted. So what are we looking to do? We're trying to consolidate and clean up the current office of a doctor or dentist and office of a healthcare professional and consolidate those into a simple office of a healthcare professional. And we're trying to take medical center or clinic and expand that and clearly define what is a medical center or clinic, what is a hospital, and what is a substance rehabilitation and treatment facility. And so that we can then zone for all of those things and have them appropriately referenced in the zoning table. So we then talked with the group and said, all right, so let's start with, we agreed we had a need. Do we want to agree that we want to retain control? And that was a fairly unanimous, yes, we should want to retain control. And then are there areas where it should and shouldn't be allowed, and what's left? So we'll go back to the maps. So when you take the residential districts off the map, you're left with the non-residential areas. There were additional considerations as we talked about those remaining areas, where we talked about things like the taxes, the nonprofit impact and pilot agreements, and all of that is sort of rolled up into tax considerations, what you'll see on some of the next slides. So after all of those discussions, it really boiled down to sort of two areas. University Station, because of the medical centers or clinics, and the Louderbrook area. And we'll talk about each one in terms of how we got there. With medical centers and clinics, they were already defined and they were allowed at University Station, whereas the other two definitions were explicitly disallowed. At Louderbrook, again, with some really good, robust discussion amongst that panel, we had people who were in the commercial real estate space who said, you know, the cost burden on trying to build a hospital, to convert something like Meditech, an office building, is just too high. Nobody's going to come and put a hospital at Meditech. They would much rather take something like Fox Hill, which would be far more easy to convert into a hospital. And so we have, you know, a highly unlikely situation where either side, Meditech or Fox Hill, is likely to sell. Therefore, the likelihood of either of these things going in there is very low. Now, that led to the recommendation of the article that proposed it for the Louderbrook area. And we were going to put an overlay district there that was going to allow both hospitals and substance abuse treatment facilities, with a bunch of special permit restrictions that the ZBA would enforce before anybody could go in with either of those uses. However, when we talked about this at our last planning board meeting, we had representatives from Fox Hill Village who had raised concerns. And so we said, okay, let's go back, revisit some of the other things that we had considered, and see what we might be able to come up with in the way of a solution to this. So I'm just going to review some of those alternatives and talk about some of the conversations that were had. So University Ave, those two uses are currently excluded from the current overlay district there. It would likely also draw opposition, not just from the folks at University Ave, the residents there, but from some of the surrounding neighborhoods as well. And there are tax implications related to locating there. So we then went and looked at, okay, well, what about the Pearl Walpole area? And again, knowing that that's a neighborhood that, you know, houses a school, there would likely be significant pushback surrounding that as well. And again, there are tax implications about, you know, taking existing commercial taxing, you know, paying residents, and not residents, businesses, and, you know, then turning it into you know, not-for-profit, therefore tax exempt. And so that was why we said, you know, no, probably not a good solution. Same thing really applies to Glacier Drive and Winslow Way. You've got Willard Circle area up here that would understandably want to have, you know, an issue with this. You also have more fractured property ownership down in here, which might increase the potential for such a use. So we were like, you know what? And again, you've got some tax implications there as well. So then we looked at Southwest Park. And when we originally talked about it, really the only thing that was sort of on this radar was the tax considerations. So then we looked at Allied Drive. And again, we had a number of folks turn out, I think it was a year and a half ago, in opposition to the potential of it going here at the East Street ARO, where the other Meditech building is. And so pushing that just across the circle would likely have resulted in the same folks being upset. And so, and again, there's tax considerations that come into play there. So then we go back and think about Southwest Park again, and you look at it, and it's literally an island. It's surrounded on all sides by railways and road, right? It's got Route 1 on this side here. You've got the on-ramp to 128, you've got 128, and then you've got the train tracks. So it creates this as its own little island here. Here's your satellite view showing that. So as we thought about what alternative plans we might be able to put forward, we said, okay, let's think about the concepts of retaining control of both the use and the conditions of that use. Well, you've got a bounded location that when you add the special permit requirements, it creates retained control. And so that retained control means we have, special permit requirements that can govern the size and scale of the buildings, the entrance and egress requirements regarding traffic, staffing and security, lighting, hazmat disposal, other things like that. So we said, let's take the current article as it stands and split it into 3 articles. Article A cleans up definitions and puts medical centers and clinics at University Station where they're already allowed. Article B creates an article that specifically disallows hospitals in any zone. And then Article C creates a new substance rehabilitation facility overlay district located in Southwest Park, subject to ZBA permit restrictions. Now you might ask, why split the article? A couple of reasons. One, it provides us with the solution that we really need as a town. And it locates it, it zones it, and it makes it very specific, and it has the protections in the aforementioned slide from the ZBA special permit. It also helps in the event that if someone were to challenge it and overturn, say the disallowing of hospitals, it doesn't overturn everything. And it also gives voters greater choice. Now you have 3 things upon which you can cast a vote to determine our collective fate. So that is what we have come up with as a way to try and address this need for the town and do it in a way that has everyone's best interest at heart and do it in a way that we feel provides the greatest protection. So that's a change from what we had talked about last Tuesday, yes, but we were taking feedback from the public and wanted to bring this forward because we thought it was the best solution. Now, there's the details behind here in terms of the specific amendments and how those things spell out. I'm going to turn this back over to Abby to talk through those.
Sure. And Rob, if you could just go through the slides. So this is that first Article A. This is the existing table of uses. The red is the proposed new language. So Article A changes that that term that we don't have currently defined for office of a doctor or dentist not on premises. Would change that to healthcare professional. We have that existing definition already, and then everything else remains the same. So it's still continued to be allowed in all the commercial and industrial zones, and then by special permit in the general residence zone. And then it also adds to the table of uses, it adds the medical center and clinic, and it prohibits it everywhere in every zoning district, except for if you look at the industrial zone, it has that footnote 10. And Rob, if we go to the next slide, that 10 is to only be permitted as allowed in section 9.7 of the zoning bylaw, which is the University Ave mixed use overlay district. So essentially, this is consistent with the zoning that we have today. So that's that first article that Rob mentioned, the revised Article A. And then this revised Article B, this is about prohibiting hospitals. So we would be, the zoning proposal is to add a definition for a hospital, which is a building designed and used for the diagnosis and treatment of a human patient that includes overnight care facilities. And then we'd also update the table of uses to add in hospitals, and then the N stands for no. So it would be prohibited everywhere in town in all zoning districts. So that's prohibited in all residential and all commercial and industrial zoning districts. And then the revised Article C, this is creating a new substance rehabilitation facility overlay district. And so we add, so this article includes adding to the definitions, the substance rehabilitation or treatment facility, to clearly define that. It's treatment of human patients for substance rehab and or treatment. And then it also revises the existing definitions for a medical center or clinic, and revises the definitions of the existing definition of office of a healthcare professional to just make sure it matches this new definition that we're proposing. And then this explains the purpose. The purpose of this, it would be adding this new overlay district. So we'd be adding it to the map and then adding a new section 9.8 to the zoning bylaw. So the purpose is to regulate it so that it would be under the purview by special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals, where they would be able to regulate its location, its access, the design of the building, and look at the surrounding neighborhoods. So this kind of spells it out over the next couple slides. If we go to the next slide, this shows the properties. So it would only be at the Southwest Park, these 8 properties. So we would update the map to kind of hatch that out as an additional new overlay district. And then this is just another view of this new overlay district, the aerial view right there off of Route 1, right next to the highway. And then Article C also goes on to outline in detail the full, this new section 9.8 talks about what the zoning board has to consider when they review an application when it comes to them. Also, any new construction in a change of use also does require a planning board approval, but the use itself would require a special permit approval from the Zoning Board of Appeals, where they would carefully look at the size and scale of the building, what's proposed, the existing and proposed traffic conditions, and looking at the egress and access to the site. They would consider the staffing levels and the levels of, you know, the clients and patients that would be served. They would also look at any potential storage of any hazardous materials. So they'd have to review all of the security arrangements, impacts to public health and public safety, fiscal implications, and then this spells out that the zoning board can also impose reasonable conditions on that special permit. So there's a new section 9.89 that outlines specifically what the zoning board can impose new conditions and safeguards, so they can take into account any impacts to the town and the surrounding properties. By they could limit the staffing levels, the staffing qualifications, security requirements, noise controls, the pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes, a limit on hours of operation. And we added, in addition, the board may require annual reporting and renewal of this substance rehab facility overlay district special permit, where it can find that annual renewal is necessary for them to monitor, for the zoning board in town to monitor that the facility is operating per the requirements set by the zoning board. And then this last step is adding the new overlay, the new use, substance rehab or treatment facility, to the table of uses. So the N means prohibited. So it's prohibited in every zoning district, but we would add the new under HB, which is a highway business, the new footnote 11, which then refers to this only by special permit in compliance with this new overlay district as outlined in 9.8 by special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So that's the proposal that staff contacted and worked with Chris and Rob over the last couple of days since your meeting last week.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Abby and Rob and Chris. Any questions or comments from board members? Yes, Ms. Conant.
So we met on February 23rd, and when did you meet to make this change?
We've
Well,
been having conversations over the last week.
So, right, but that wasn't a public hearing supposedly that we had on the 23rd, but you said based on public feedback. And this article is completely different than what was listed in the warrant detailing information on the webpage. And if I'm correct, as well as in the listing in the newspaper. So this is a completely different article than what's listed for the public hearing. And I'm not sure we can go forward with it.
Mr. Hearn, do you have any background on this? Because it is dramatic. It is, and can we split an article into 3 articles and all that stuff?
And change the location. The location was specifically stated in the article that was posted in the newspaper, as well as on the webpage.
You can change things right up to the final vote of the FinCom. This is a radical departure, but you've noticed the public hearing. There are people here to comment on it. There'll also be 2 FinCom public hearings to comment on it. I think you can take public comment on this tonight. And if you need to change it again, I think you could probably change it again. Ms. Conant is correct. The booklet has gone out for the FinCom, but the ability to notice people about this change is certainly well within your grasp moving forward. So I think you're okay going forward. This is an open public meeting, and you're bringing this forward for discussionary purposes.
Any other board questions? Anyone? Then I think let's proceed to the public comment here. I saw that Mr. Messing had indicated that he would like to speak first. If anyone else would like to speak, raise your hand or enter something in the Q&A so that we can recognize you, and we'll go to Mr. Messing.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I have to say I'm a little disappointed. I had a whole canned speech about Meditech I was going to give that seems to be a little bit unnecessary at this point. But I am also a 30-year resident of the town. And my daughter just recently announced she's moving to town to raise her family. So I certainly have a vested interest here. So maybe I'll speak on terms of that, which is basically say that regardless of what this finally turns out to be, I think it's very important that the town go ahead with this. And I do appreciate all the people who've been working on it for the last couple of years. I think it's very difficult for all of us to get our hands around the distinction between letting it come in anywhere with no control, or trying to make it come into a place where they're going to have to meet a lot of restrictions if they want to make it happen. As someone who's thought about this a lot, because the previous proposals did include a Meditech building, aside from the fact that we're not planning to sell, we don't do this kind of business, we're just an office-based software company. I don't think that that people fully understand how difficult it would be to build either of these things on the Meditech locations, or for that matter, anywhere in town. If this gives us more control, I'm in favor of it. I do have one question, which is that Rob's presentation, which I thought was great, focused mostly on location, where it's going to be centered. Could there be some comments made about any differences we'd have in the conditions if it was to come either with or without this thing passing? In other words, can we control, more if we let this happen, if it did happen to come in the areas that we allowed it? My question clear?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Abby, do you want to bring up that, that slide that had the conditions?
Sure thing. Hold on one second, Dave. Let me just get that. So it starts here, right?
Yep. So essentially this article and the original one that was proposed in January had a lot more specifics. So many times we'll change zoning to just have it by special permit, and it's a general special permit, which is kind of another section of the zoning bylaw that just for the zoning board is not very specific for the use. But this whole new section talks about what the zoning board needs to consider when they review each application when an application comes forward. So they have to make positive findings when the zoning board votes. So they'll have to vote, so they should come up with that criteria at the time of their vote, and they'll have to to approve, they would have to issue a positive findings in order to grant an approval. So they would have to go through this whole section of 9.88, where each section where it talks about the impacts of the size and scale of the proposed buildings, the traffic conditions to and from the facility. They'll have to take a careful look at the staffing levels, the noise, security.
But without this, do they can build whatever they want? They could build a 50-story building if we don't do this?
If we didn't have zoning in place, if we didn't have any zoning in place as it exists today, the proposal would come in, and then Joe Doyle, the building commissioner, would have to review the specifics of the use, where it's proposed. He could find it a similar use to something we may have in the bylaw, and if not, or make a decision on that, and then that could possibly go to the zoning board of appeals. So it would either be determined to be similar to an existing use, such as office of a doctor or a medical center, or if it's not, then the applicant would appeal the building commissioner's decision to the zoning board of appeals. And then the zoning board doesn't have anything specific to review. So they don't have, that's why specific criteria or specific language in the zoning bylaw to work off of.
So Abby, at a very high level for Howard's question, without zoning it and without having all of the additional protections afforded by a special permit, we have a lot less control over not only where, to have the first part of Howard's question, but what can go where it's proposed. And that's what you're saying. Without the benefit of the zoning board of appeals special permit, the building inspector doesn't have as much to be able to object to. And
Thank you. That makes it clear.
Abby, as we're talking about this, can you comment on the differences between this level of scrutiny that the ZBA is required to execute on this special permit proposal versus what they currently do for most special permits? I know that they may vary, but this is far more intensive requirements of the ZBA than they currently exercise on, I believe, any of their special permits.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the zoning bylaw, we have a general section 10.3 on special permits, and there's 6 criteria that the zoning board looks at, but it's not as nearly as detailed. It's looking at social and community impacts, traffic flow and safety, adequacy of utilities and public services, neighborhood character, impacts on the natural environment, and potential fiscal impact. So there are 6 criteria, but it's not as detailed and specific on what findings that the zoning board has to look at.
Thank you, Abby. I see there are 4 people who have raised their hands or want to speak, so we're going to proceed with Ms. Castaldini first.
Hi, thank you. 54 Birch Street. I'm asking a question. I just want to make sure I have the timeline right. So I listened to the 4-hour meeting on February 23rd, where it seemed as though the subcommittee, which did tremendous work, after many, many weeks of discussion, came up with the option of the location near Fox Hill. And then in a matter of 6 days, because they had opposition from Fox Hill, which I'm sure they'll have opposition from wherever this is located, because Westwood's a very residential area. We've now come up with this new location, which still borders Westdale in the same East Street neighborhood that's near the second Meditech. It's just over the train tracks. So now in these next 6 days, everything changed, and then we need to be ready for having a final warrant by March 8th. I'm just not sure if I have those dates correct. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We had talked about every one of those locations in the number of weeks that you talked about back in the fall when Abby convened this advisory panel. We went back after getting some feedback that there was going to be some opposition and said, if we revisit all of the different things that we had considered and we look at why we had sort of made the recommendations that we made, are there any that might make more sense? And given the borders around this Southwest Park, it was the one that we could retain the greatest control over. The only way you get in and out of there is in a car through the one entrance to the place. It's right off the highway. And there are ample protections that are around that facility, that property, to protect the neighborhoods, because not only do you have the train tracks, but you have the fences around the train tracks. So it was the place that provided a solution that provides the greatest benefit to the greatest number of residents, while having, very little impact on those that are nearby because of the island nature of that property. So yes, there was a lot of discussion over those many weeks by the panel, and we went back and took another look at all of the things that we had discussed.
It just seems like a really quick pivot and a very short timeline for any kind of public comment. I'm sure people might be just finding out about this, just now, attending the meeting, and there's, less than a week to have any, feedback or discussion about it. I know you mentioned earlier that this would most likely be a protected class. Have we ever gotten any, legal information if that is truly the case? I know it's a thought, but
That was the opinion of
It is a
special
protected
counsel.
class. Special counsel drafted a memo in 2019. I reviewed the memo during the process and found it to still be good law.
Mr. Hearn, so I'm looking at that memo right now, and it's not a controversial memo. Is there any reason we can't just release that to everybody so that they can all?
You are the client of that memo. You hold the privilege on that memo. If you vote as a group to release it, you can do that.
because it was something that, that we had requested back in the original that kind of lays out the legal framework for this. And I think it would be helpful to include that in the materials.
And I'll just conclude with that. We know many of our area towns are choosing not to identify an area. And I understand completely about wanting to have control, but there's also that option.
Yeah, and you know, no is a perfectly legitimate answer until it's not, right? So the reality is, by the definitions or the references created in the University Ave overlay district, it identified these two things: hospital and substance abuse facilities. So now that they're defined without actually being in the definitions section, and they don't have any place that they're allowed or disallowed, there isn't any control in place. So we are different from other towns in that those references exist. And so we need to close those loopholes.
Right.
So we're different because we referred to them and then we never defined them correctly? Because I know since we've been talking about this since 2017, have we been approached by any facilities? You know, so that's almost about 4 years now.
I can say that I have not heard from any facility that wants to operate a substance rehabilitation or treatment center in Westwood.
Thank you, Ms. Castledini. I want to go directly to the other folks who are waiting to speak as well, if that's okay.
Thank
I
you.
realize kind of our public hearing process, and in one model, you would just have a series of people state their opinion. I think this is a helpful approach to have a back and forth, because this is new information. I'm looking at it for the first time tonight as well. So let's go to the people I have on the list here so far. Ms. Fusco was I think the next one to raise her hand. Let's see, are we able to unmute?
She should be unmuted now.
It still shows mute. Why don't we, let's see if we can try again, and we'll go to the next person, come back to Fran if we can get that to work. I think, is it, hang on, just, it's Barbara Clark.
Or there's a Clark and there's a Barbara Hayes.
It says
one?
Barbara Clark is the C.
Oh.
So that the orange one, that, yeah.
Nope. I think I need another shot at unmuting.
We can hear you now.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Clark. I'm a resident of Fox Hill Village and I chair the board. This is a difficult issue that you've been presented with. I can see that a lot of work has been done. On behalf of our 400 residents, thank you for the time that you have put into this and the work that you do for the board, the planning board. Fox Hill is our home. We have 400 elderly residents. For most of us, this is going to be the last home that we live in. And that's all I want to say. Thank you for your review and your intention to do the right thing for the town. We appreciate it.
Great. And thank you for your comment. I had noted in the Q&A next that I think Mr. Olenoff had a question. Are we able to unmute Mr. Olenoff?
Yes, just did.
Steve Olenoff, 52 Glandor Road. I just wondering, it's probably is a legal question. Does the town have the ability, the authority to regulate staffing levels within buildings?
Steve, I got this late this afternoon and I have not had a chance to review it. Certainly the town has a right to ensure the safety of its residents. I'm not sure if that includes staffing within the building or not. That's something I got to take a deeper dive on. But certainly the town has the right to ensure that a facility operates safely, whether that's internal staffing or not. I don't know tonight. I will try and know by March 8th, certainly by the end of the FinCom process.
Yes, and another part of that question would be, can you require beyond what the minimum, there are standards set for hospitals and centers, and if the town feels that's not enough, does it have the ability to regulate them more than?
Let's not cross that hypothetical bridge before we need to, Steve.
Yeah, but the point is, if you can't do that, then what does this actually accomplish? This might not really accomplish anything.
Well, but let's say that we talk to the AG, perhaps, if we can, and DPH, and they say, no, you can't do staffing. So you drop that 9.8.8.3 if you can't do it, but you still have a right to have all the other stuff. So I
agree. Yeah. That's why I was asking the question.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason they've split it up into 3 articles, because it is somewhat controversial. And you want to get as much protection as you can for the town, but you don't want to have it all fall apart on one small part. So more work to be done, Steve.
Thank you, Pat.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Let's go to Barbara Hayes has her hand raised.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Sam Hayes, Barbara's husband, and we've lived here in Westwood for almost 50 years. The first 40 were at 345 Manhattan Street, and we've lived now for quite a few years at Fox Hill. And I am very pleased by the effort that you put in to try to find a resolution which is not going to be injurious to as many people as might otherwise be the case. And I'm going to echo what our chairman of the board, Barbara Clark, has said, that we have 400 or 405 residents who are owners of their apartments. This is unusual for a retirement community. We own them. It's for many of it's our largest investment, and we take the ups and downs of price changes in our apartments depending upon the environment, the circumstances, or other economic conditions that come along. So although it hasn't been widely publicized at Fox Hill at this point, and it doesn't look as though it's going to have to be, but there would be wide opposition to something which affected the safety and the economic value of each of these residents' homes. So this looks like a solution which minimizes the negatives and creates a positive set of conditions for control, and I applaud you for it.
Thank you. Dave, if I may.
Oh, Doug Cross. Sorry, I thought I was trying to unmute him and I was muted.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, this is Doug Cross at 135 Elm Street. I've watched the last several meetings, and one of the things that you guys praised about the Louderbrook Longwood area was that there were only two buildings available, and you vetted with each of the owners of those buildings that they had no intentions to sell. Have you talked to, because I believe the new suggested location has nearly 4 times as many buildings. They have about 7. Have you talked to those owners and vetted that they have no intention to sell?
Does anybody want to respond, Abby?
No, we have not yet had the opportunity to review that with the property owners, given the time frame.
So, I mean, that was one of the main points you guys kept bringing up as to why the previous location was such a good location for this overlay district. So, I think people will be more comfortable if you gave the same vetting for the current proposed location. And you also say, this one's kind of an island. There's only one road in. The previous location, when I look, I see only one road, and it's basically surrounded by all woods or highways. So it's kind of the same, island type area you're looking for.
Yes and no, because so fair point as it relates to the businesses, and part of what I believe was an obstacle to getting that done in that time frame is several of them are holding companies that they're owned by, and it's not as clear as to who to do the outreach to. So I think that was what I had heard from Nora when we were looking into those things. Second part of that is the other piece is the train tracks create a very different barrier than just woods and the fence that is there. So that's one of the things that we thought was that made it more of an isolated island than the Louderbrook area.
Have you thought about also any of the traffic implications? I know suburban vans constantly are coming through our neighborhood like every hour on the hour to get to that location. So that's just another thing I'd hope that you look into.
Well, that's actually why so many of the things in the special permit related to that, because we had heard from some of the property owners related to another project that traffic is a challenge there for the employees coming in, because you're turning and slowing down right at the point at which people are accelerating to get on the highway. And then you can imagine what it must be like getting out of there in the evening, as you have to almost punch it to get out of their driveway. So that was why we felt it was very important to put 9.8.82 in there regarding the safe ingress egress.
Okay, that's all I guess had to say. Thank you.
Chris, I have a couple of questions based on what this gentleman just said. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I understand the delicate nature of this article, but I just need to clarify. Abby, you said that the abutters to this zoning area were not notified due to it. It was time sensitive. Is that correct?
Not the abutters, the property owners. We haven't reached out to the property owners, but it's not required for this kind of zoning amendment. We just previously, we knew the 2 property owners that we personally knew, so we were able to contact them for the last article.
Mm-hmm. And this question is for Pat. Is he still on? Or is he signed off?
I'm still here, Ms. Conant.
Yeah, quick question for you, and this is sort of just kind of going on what some of the residents were saying. I had sent you this question a while back. I know that there was a substance abuse facility that was attempted to go in Canton, and they tried to do it on the premise that it was similar to an existing use of a convalescent home. They had not zoned for this yet. And it's my understanding that was denied. And so Canton did go through a zoning process to put this in place. And that developer did not get that put into the nursing home, convalescent home, but another facility went in. So I guess that sort of goes back to the question of, you know, what are the pros and cons of zoning? Definitely controlling, I understand that, but how can we make the residents feel more secure? Knowing that, for instance, Dedham didn't zone for it, then they zoned for it, and now they're getting one. How do we make them feel more secure that this is the right decision?
Well, I think part of what you're looking at right there on the screen now, with a very specific special permit required, is part of that. Now, whether or not we can get down to staffing, I don't have an answer for you tonight. But all the other things can make them feel more secure. I think I've told you in the past, the famous case, I believe it's in the town of Millbury, where they took a nursing home and it was next to a school, and they got a substance abuse facility right next to an elementary school, and there was nothing, and the town tried to deny it, and they got stuck with it. So I'm not that familiar with the Canton situation, but what they're proposing, I think, is trying to make those who are closest to it feel the best they can about this being zoned that way.
Okay.
I happen to think we dodged the biggest bullet we did when Green bought the Westwood Lodge property
Mhm.
and put in those 40 condos, because that could have been ripe for this kind of facility, but that's now by the board. So that's a good thing.
But at the last meeting, someone had mentioned that some of these developers grab these hotels or build.
Yeah.
And so is that hotel that's on Route 1, is that included within that area of
I
Southwest?
don't think so. I think it's on the other side of the street, isn't it?
No, yeah,
Yes.
that's
Right.
in highway business, right?
It wouldn't be allowed to go there
So what
if this
about,
were to pass.
right, so what about the preschool then at the Encounter Church?
Well,
We don't have anything in here about, like, a lot of the articles that are written, they say within so many feet from, you know, a school or a daycare center. And unless I missed it, I don't see any of that in here.
This is the initial stab at the criteria. If you'd like to add additional criteria, such as distance from a school or a church, you can add that as well.
Well, I mean, I would think that this decision was made, 4 days after we met? So, I mean, there was a lot of discussion going in. I would have thought that a daycare center or a school would have been something that would have been brought up as well.
So these criteria that you're looking at here, section 9.8.8, that's not different. That's not something that changed in the last week. What's different is the location. These are the special permit criteria that we're starting with. And the purpose of this hearing is for further discussion and for ideas from planning board members and from the public on additional criteria that you think is appropriate.
I want to make sure there's any additional public comment. I want to go back to Ms. Fusco. Were you able to unmute? If not, put another question in the Q&A, and I will read that at the end. We can try.
I just unmuted Ms. Fusco.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane. And my question, I actually have a couple questions. I wrote them down, so hold on a second. Okay. Are the Southwest Park owners on this Zoom? And I would like to hear their opinion, just like Fox Hill residents were afforded the opportunity. Are you aware of the preschool at Southwest Park and the preschool across the street?
So I don't, Abby, we didn't notify anybody because we didn't have, it changed, right?
Right, I'm not, unless, I mean, if the property owners are here, they can speak up, but they haven't been notified.
It's not typical to notify property owners of zoning changes. We notify town residents of zoning changes by our FinCom's hearing. The planning board has its hearing. It doesn't send out notices to abutters. It doesn't send out notices to property owners. It just notifies the town by placing their hearing on the town meeting, on the town website, and by putting an ad in the paper. The Finance and Warrant Commission sends out pamphlets about their hearings to all residents in town. Again, not to all property owners, to all residents. So that's the way zoning changes are made. It's not common to notify property owners. In the case of one property owner, Fox Hill Village, that has several residents within it, we thought it was appropriate to speak to them. And when concerns had been addressed back in 2019 and again in 2020 about the Meditech properties, we thought it was appropriate to get input from the owners of that property as well. So we asked Howard for his information, for his comments on this, and we asked Fox Hill Village representatives as well. But it's not standard practice to go speak to property owners about a rezoning. There are 8 separate parcels with 7 separate owners in Southwest Park. Most of the properties are in realty trusts, and there is not an identified person for us to contact. If the planning board wants to get the input of those property owners, a letter could certainly be sent to them telling them that this is an article that's being considered. If the property owners are Westwood residents, they'll have an opportunity to vote on that. If they're not Westwood residents, they will not.
My second question was, has anyone looked at the proximity between Fox Hill Village and the Meditech building? You know, the distance, and what is the distance from this Southwest Park to the neighboring neighbors, just to see what's the difference in proximity.
The Fox Hill Village and Meditech properties are adjacent to each other. They touch each other. If you're talking about the distance between the buildings, the distance between the existing buildings is significant. If either property was redeveloped, the distance between the buildings would be based on the setback requirements. In the case of the Southwest Park and the nearest abutting residential structure, they don't physically abut. They are divided by the train tracks.
All right, no matter how you slice and dice it, I'd like to know what is the physical distance between Fox Hill Village and Meditech building and Southwest Park and the neighboring neighbors right next to Southwest Park.
So I don't have that information available right now, but it could be.
Wouldn't that be important to have? Because you're talking children within that neighborhood. You're also talking a preschool within Southwest Park.
So the distance between the buildings can be calculated. It can be done through the town's aerial maps. It's not information we have. And distance between existing buildings does not predicate distance between new buildings if new buildings are constructed.
And I think, and we can, if as this proceeds, we can find that information and bring it to the next discussion. I want to, is there anyone else? I saw a hand raised and then it went down. So I just want to see if anyone else, any of the other attendees would like to speak. Can you raise your hand now or put something in the Q&A? And I won't read that. Again, it's, I see a couple of comments. So would there's a number, this 378-931. I believe that is Annie Lewis O'Connor. Did you want to speak?
Sure. I guess my comment, and I do want to say that I enjoyed participating on the committee. That is, did a lot of work to bring this forward.
Can you give your, address and stuff?
Sorry about that. Sure. Annie Lewis O'Connor, 42 Hawthorne Street. Apologies. So I have spent a fair amount of time in dialogue and personal education, in sort of, coming to this with unbiased thinking about it. And and I'm happy to go on record to say I do personally support this. I am concerned about what was raised here tonight about the children in the preschool. I was not aware that there is that down at South Park. And obviously we can't, we've got to have language to protect our children. I think some of the concerns around previous locations were, too close to schools and residents. And if there is daycare and preschools down at Southwest, I think that's real important. And if we can get language in here that distance that or speaks to that proactively, that would be important, I think. I'm done.
Dave, if I can just say, Annie was an invaluable member of the panel too. She asked many great questions, and it was really helpful to have a perspective that, hey, explain this, explain it and help educate me so that I am fully in the loop on why we need to do this. And so we just had very open, honest discussions about things. I thank you, Annie, for your involvement in it.
All right. Jackie K, did you want to speak? If I can recognize you. All right, I think, Abby, did you unmute Jackie?
Yeah, Jackie should be unmuted. Looks like she disappeared.
Oh, okay. And yeah, and please, everybody, bear with us on this. It's an interesting challenge with a public hearing. I mean, we've done a bunch of these, but we have a lot more people now. So I just want to make sure that everybody who wants to speak is able to speak. And let's see, the other hands that are raised, they've already spoken, and I don't think, can we put the hands, Abby, you can put all the hands down. That way we can know if someone's wants to speak again, right?
Yes, if I know how to do that. Connor, do you know how to do that?
Yep, I can help you out.
Thank you.
Just to make sure, because I don't want to, if someone's frantically trying to get my attention. All right, so I don't see any other hands raised. There's one. So Ms. McLaughlin.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Paula McLaughlin. I'm at 39 Hawthorne Street. I just wanted to, there were a couple things that were said. I agree wholeheartedly about the preschools. I think that's certainly something that we need to take a look at. But I'm also a little concerned that if it was so important that, that you had talked to the owners, the business owners down by Fox Hill Village, and now, and they assured you that it wouldn't be, and it was, wouldn't be used. The same thing was told to us about Howard Messing and the Meditech building. And that was, we were assured that. I'm feeling like we're getting no assurances. It makes me less comfortable hearing that there are pots of trusts or other, other sorts of things, and they're harder to get in touch with. That means that they have a less vested interest in our community. So, I feel like, and also saying oh, it's a timing issue. If it's a timing issue, so much time has gone into this, and I appreciate all of you for committing yourselves to being on the planning board, and for people like Annie who made time to be on the committee. But I feel like if this is so important and we haven't given this area the same due diligence that was given to Fox Hill Village or, anywhere else, I would hate to see us rush to do this to get something on the books.
All right, thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else who wants to raise their hand? All right, if there's no other hands raised, I would open up to board discussion. Are there any more comments or thoughts of, and process wise? So just, Abby, remind me if or Pat, so we have this public hearing. We will, at this meeting, we need to make a recommendation to FinCom on the articles. This is the next to last one. And then it would go to the March 8th. The hearing continues. So March 8 at FinCom, and there can be more feedback. And then typically that would be continued to the next planning board meeting. And historically, that is so that you go to FinCom and they may say, we totally don't like this either, or we think you should make these changes. We could then at our planning board meeting, make additional changes and have more public input, and then recommend those changes to the final FinCom hearing, which is on March 28th, maybe, or I got that wrong.
Yep, the end of March.
So-
The FinCom will have
So
end
we,
of March.
so we have tonight, we have the first FinCom meeting, a planning board meeting, and another FinCom meeting. And it is very surprising to see dramatic changes in this, but that would be the working it through process. Like it's not done tonight and then that's the way it is, but just kind of, there's those 3 times. And so that's kind of how the process goes now. I mean, just because we recommend it tonight, does that mean, what are our options? Do we have other options, like to just take it to FinCom for input? And is that the same thing as recommending it?
Well, I think you have to take it to FinCom on the 8th to get their feedback at a minimal. I mean, the only other thing you can do is not proceed forward with it. And you have the ability to make adjustments between now and the final FinCom hearing. FinCom, Finance and Warrant Commission, has to make a recommendation on a warrant article to town meeting to adopt it, to vote no on it, or to vote indefinite postponement. And you have the ability through the Board of Selectmen to control it further as well. So, you've had a hearing tonight. You can have a hearing on March 8th, and you can make changes from there.
Mr. Gotti.
Just a question for you, Pat. Mr. Olenoff asked the question related to the staffing. You need some time to look into that. Totally
I
understand.
do. That's a tricky one. That's
My
it's
question on that is do we leave that in for what goes forward to FinCom, or would you like that piece removed to take out?
I'm not prepared tonight to ask you to remove it.
Okay.
It gives you additional levels of control if it's constitutional or if it's legal. That really is it's bordering on Department of Public Health jurisdiction as well. Perhaps even the Department of Mental Health, depending on how the facility is licensed. So, yeah, no, I'm not prepared to make that recommendation tonight.
Fair enough.
Maybe the 8th in front of the FinCom I might be, but not tonight.
It's important on that criteria to keep in mind that the way the draft is written right now, it doesn't ask the zoning board to substitute its judgment on staffing levels. What it does is ask for the zoning board to consider the staff levels in comparison to industry standards and best practices.
Yep.
So it's looking to make sure the staffing is appropriate for the use, as opposed to having the zoning board determine what would be appropriate staffing.
All right, I see some more hands were raised. Let me first, any other board members want to weigh in on this? Then we'll go back to taking public comment. All right, I'll recognize Ms. Provost, Laura Provost.
I'm glad to hear the change this evening. I will defer my time to Skip Wells, who is here.
Greetings all. Skip Wells. I've for 51 years lived on Salisbury Drive. For the last 6 months, my home is on 10 Longwood. I would first like to compliment all of you for your efforts and volunteer time to make Westwood a better town. If you will, I did my time in the box in the late 70s, early 80s. I was chairman of the FinCom for a while and then chairman of the Long Range Planning Committee. And my question is, at that point in time, we had an unwritten rule that among the committees that you could not put a new project into a neighborhood or a place that abutted a neighborhood that the local neighborhood was opposed to. Does 988 just attempt to codify that?
If I could address that, what 988 does is it attempts to give more definitive criteria for a zoning board to use if they are faced with considering a special permit. If we don't have this special overlay district and it's just considered as a standard special permit, or worse yet, just placed by a court under order, there are no specific criteria. The general special permit criteria is simply weighing the benefits of the use against the detriments to the neighborhood and coming up with a balance of the two. This goes further than that. This specifically says that the zoning board shall not approve it unless it determines positively that each of the criteria have been met. So it imposes a greater level of control.
Including giving more control to the neighborhood?
Yes, because the control is not to the neighborhood, the control is to the zoning board, who would listen to the neighborhood and the neighborhood objections and would have a way of qualifying those objections and determining that they could not make that positive finding because the neighborhood objections were strong enough to convince them that the project would have a negative influence on the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other, I saw a hand raised and then it was not raised. So again, anybody that wants to speak, raise their hand in the in the sidebar. And Nada, would you like to speak? All right, I think your audio is unmuted. So Nada,
David, you
you're,
can address the questions in the Q&A. There's a lot of them.
if yeah, I was hoping that people would come over to. So we did recognize Nada, but I'm not hearing anything. All right, I'll take a look at so in the Q&A, let me scroll through this.
There is one hand still raised, Dave.
Yeah, Annie O'Connor, did you want to speak again?
Nope, I'm all set.
Oh, all right, sorry.
All right, let's see, Doug Cross. Brian T. Hardiman, 40 Westdale Road. This is the first I'm hearing about this new zoning location. It seems to be rushed again by a self-imposed artificial deadline. And I'm Laura, Fran. And we have a number of comments from Nada. And it's both disturbing and disgusting that this board can be so easily influenced by whom you perceive as having more standing in this community than just a Joe Schmo resident. It's actually pathetic. And all right, I'll read. And Nada says, let's be frank and call this public hearing what it is, a lot of BS. It seems that this board has forgotten the outcry from police officers, doctors, nurses, all residents whom attended these meetings after the AG's office rejected a medical use article. All of these residents tried to implore on this board that substance abuse facilities don't belong anywhere near highway entrances and exits. Jackie K. We were not able to recognize her before, so her comment is from Jackie K. It says, the neighbors have not been notified, so when are you going to be working with them on how the zoning will benefit them? And I believe that's all the comments in the chat. And I do not see any additional hands raised. So I think at this point, I would say, is there board members who would like to make additional comments and discuss this as to what we do next with this?
It seems like right now would be the time to add any, as Nora pointed out, the conditions were there before, and they're not specific to this site necessarily. So if we want site-specific or location-specific conditions, this would be a time that planning board members should suggest. It had been suggested before about the preschool or any school in its proximity. It could be a condition for the zoning board of appeals that they use a distance from a school or preschool as criteria for approving a special permit. This is the time when we think of these things. We've responded to public response last week, and we're continuing to talk with the residents, with people in our town about how to move forward, keeping control and protecting our town. So I think right now, if any board members have any thoughts about adding conditions, now would be the right time to do it.
I'd want to hear from Pat on that before we added it, just because if we then add that, does it basically undercut the ability to use that and zone it in that way based on the physical space? Like if you have a certain distance, now do you take the 8 properties that are part of Southwest and say, you know, if they need to be certain distance apart, do you now basically only have one of the 8 that you can place it in, and would that get it then overturned?
So it would be further limiting. I don't right now tonight understand where preschools or schools are in that area. So that would be something that I kind of have to see before I could give you an opinion on that. But yes, it would. There's no question it would be further limiting. And the further you limit the ability to have substance abuse facilities, the more likely that the Attorney General may rule that the bylaw is unconstitutional because you're essentially discriminating against a protected class. So there is some risk in doing that to the bylaw, to the zoning bylaw itself. Yes.
Right, I'll just add, I did see some other communities did include a distance from a school. Some of them, you know, were usually outside the district, since in this case, at your recent, you know, a meeting in January or was your February meeting, there is a childcare use right in this district. So as Pat said, it wouldn't, some communities use like 500 feet, but I think 500 feet all the way around, that would make the whole district ineligible. So it would have to be less than that. It's only about 700 feet all the way around where this location of the preschool is. I just did a quick measurement around the building.
Did we lose Ms. Conant?
Yes, sorry. She just sent me a message. She had a family emergency and had to leave.
Okay, sorry. All right, so who else has anything to say this evening? I think it's a difficult situation. I expected after the last meeting that there would be difficulty, and I like the idea that this was split into parts, that there are 3 parts of this that could allow for, it might make it possible to pass a part of it. But it's also, I just like the timing of this. So neither I nor Mr. Ahern saw this before tonight, and I know the timing was quick. I'm trying to get something done here, but I think it's difficult to recommend this. Anybody?
Dave, it's not unusual, Mr. Chairman, it's not unusual. I've seen the planning board in the past bring articles to FinCom for their review and input. That's the only way you, and they may tell you different things than you've heard tonight, but that's the only way you're going to find out what their view on your proposal, on this proposal is.
My thoughts are that we had a good process that got us to the last meeting, that an inclusive process that brought in people from all over and kind of really laid the foundation for like really demonstrating that we had a much better process this time. Because last time around, we got to a public hearing, we had a lot of opposition, and we tried to rewrite the thing on the fly. And it didn't stick. We got to the next planning board meeting and there was an agreement over the wording. And so, it was difficult. So here we are again with a completely revised proposal. And it sort of feels like a lot of the value of what went into it. It would be so much better if this could have been incorporated into that process before, where all the people that were involved in it had input.
Dave, all the people who were involved in that process we've spoken with them throughout the week, and they've all had opportunity to speak against. And to my knowledge, I don't think any have. They may have some concerns about this location, but nobody has categorically said, no, this is not the right place for this use. So those people, and again, as Rob showed, this was one of the locations brought up and discussed at length. And the only reason it was turned down in favor of the Longwood Meditech Fox Hill Village was tax reasons. But we basically made the decision after last week's feedback where it was represented to us that there were 400 residents who would not support this, that we need to look back at some of the other places that we discussed and what would be an acceptable location. And it was deemed that this, despite the possible tax lessening basically for the town, this would be a far better place given its island characteristics. And it would have no impact to resident living nearby, given the physical impediments that separate this from any residential home in Westwood. So this was part of the discussion, Dave. It just, we figured the Longwood area was a better one, but we listened, and I know someone used the word pivot. We did pivot. We listened, and we came up with an alternative. That's what we did. That's what we do on the planning board. We listen and we adjust.
I think it's critical to me that I'm hearing that this advisory group continued to work on this, that it's not just like you went back to the drawing board and wrote something else. It's that you went back, or Rob, you were going to say something, right?
Yeah, I actually, so Chris and I were the two from the planning board that were on this advisory panel, and we walked through a number of things, starting with, do we feel like we have exposure? And so you and Mike and Deb weren't part of that discussion with that group of people. So I'd like to ask the two of you that are remaining here, do you feel like we have an exposure? Let's start with the series of questions that we used to get to the end results that we got to, because I think if we only if we have, that type of discussion in this, can we get to a common answer? It's a sticky situation no matter how you slice it. So let's start with, do you both agree that we have an exposure?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree that we want to retain control?
Yes.
Okay. And so then do you agree that it shouldn't go in any of the residential zones?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So now we're down to the non-residential zones. And if you were looking at the remaining zones, where would you come up with that you would propose getting this done? If you agree that we need to get it done and we want to retain control over getting it done, where would you best place it? Because that's the open discussion that we've got to have. And if we can't have that honest discussion, then we're never going to get this done.
All right, well, let's, we can take it to FinCom, and as I outlined, we have there'll be the FinCom hearing, and there can be more public input at that hearing. Take it back to the next planning board meeting, continue the process, and take it to the final FinCom meeting, and ultimately it's to town meeting.
Excuse me, Pat, is there an option of us taking basically option A and option B being either Louderbrook or Southwest Park as an A or a B option to FinCom, just so we have more time to come down with a final decision of what we're going to put forward?
Can you hear me?
I can.
So I think you probably can do something like that, but I think it would be very confusing. I think you have to kind of make a decision where you want to do it, because I think if you have an option A and an option B, I don't think it's going to be well received by FinCom. I think you could probably do it from a legal perspective, but I've seen planning boards in the past do that kind of thing, and it just wasn't well received.
I understand.
It has happened organically, Mike, where in the course of a FinCom meeting, so what would you like? And their response has invariably been, it's not our job to tell you. It's your job to present, and we'll render a decision on that. So, yeah, I don't think it would be, as Pat said, seen favorably to go in and say, tell us where you want it.
Right. So based on that, and we like I agree, this needs to be done. We need to move forward. If we had done this before we approved a child care preschool center over right in the middle of the street at Southwest Park, which to me alleviates any idea of doing a set distance. I think we would eliminate any and all properties in that sense in this zone.
Michael, you would have been hard pressed to not allow that childcare facility.
Oh, I fully understand. That's a by right.
Based on the Dover Amendment.
I think he's saying if they had never come to us in the first place.
They had never come to us in the first place, I think this would be an easier decision for me than what I'm presented with now.
Or on the flip side, if this had been the solution that had been implemented 2 years ago, I don't know when the child care center came in, but there probably would not have been a place that they would have gone in with a child, or the church would not have asked to open a daycare center knowing that that was a possibility. Now, again, we are zoning for it. We are putting teeth into the special permit regulations, so the likelihood of it is low. But the reality is that if we all agree that there's an exposure, and if we agree that we want to retain control, it really comes down to where can we do that, where we have the least exposure to the fewest number of residents. And that I get, look, I get anybody's going to come out against it in some way, shape, or form. The question on the table is, collectively, as a town, do we agree there's exposure? And do we agree we want to retain control? And then it becomes a discussion of where and where best and how best.
Correct. So, Mr. Chairman, should we put forth a vote for this board of what to recommend to FinCom?
So someone can make a motion, yes.
Do you mind, could I just give you one point of information? I've been checking on the maps online, and I just want to answer one resident, I don't remember who it was, but someone had questioned about the distance between properties in the two districts. So I looked at the closest home to Southwest Park. The distance between the furthest part of the home and the line that would designate the new zone is 145 feet. In Fox Hill Village, the distance between the two property lines are abutting, but the distance between the building and the property line is 68 feet. So the property line is closer to the Fox Hill Village building than the property line is closest to the Southwest Park. If you look at the buildings, the existing buildings, in Southwest Park, the existing home is 215 feet from the closest existing building in Southwest Park. If a new building was built to the full extent of the setbacks, that distance could be shrunk down to 160 feet. In the case of Fox Hill Village, the distance between the two buildings currently is 675 feet. If a new building was built on either property, the distance could shrink to 98 feet. So just to give you a sense of how that works. Southwest Park, 145 feet to the lot zone, 160 feet to the building. Fox Hill Village, 68 feet to the lot, to the zone, 98 feet between buildings. And if I could also just point out one more thing, you're right that there is currently a child care facility that is in Southwest Park. Anywhere that you zone for this use, a child care facility could come to, because child care facilities can go anywhere they choose to go.
All right, is there a motion?
Dave, before we make a motion, just a point of order, is it, does it make sense for it to be what you or Mike that makes the motion? And I don't know if you can, as chair, make a motion, but given that Chris and I were involved in it, I think it would make more sense for one of the two of you to make that motion.
Procedural point of order. Dave can suggest the motion and someone can adopt it if he wants to.
Thank you.
And I'll suggest that we withdraw this article and not recommend it to FinCom. All right, Mr. McCusker, would you like to make a different motion?
I am going to make a motion on Article 4 for a request for favorable action for the zoning amendments related to medical uses at Southwest Park.
All right, there's some.
Hold on, just real quick. There are 3 separate amendment articles within this, so it would be
All
for
three
the-
of those previously stated.
I'll second that.
All right, is there any further discussion? All right, there's a motion by Mr. McCusker, seconded by Mr. Paff. And we will have a roll call vote. Mr. Paff,
Yes.
Ms. Conant is not here. Mr. Gotti,
Yes.
Mr. McCusker,
Yes.
and I vote no. So the motion passes 3-1, and the article will be recommended to FinCom for further discussion. All right, let's move on to the next article, which is Abby.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick.
I can still see your screen, Rob.
Yeah, can you just, why don't you take me out of co-host mode
Oh,
there?
okay. Okay. All right, and the last planning board zoning article is a housekeeping article. This is just to correct any errors or typos. We found a couple. Up on the screen, we have an incorrect section number listed in the table of uses. We accidentally referenced the old section. So the proposal is to change it from 8.4 to 8.3. That as a result of, we had a long time ago an old senior residential development section that has been deleted. So this is correcting that number. Also, another section 8 changing it to 8.4. It was incorrectly in the table of uses listed as 8.5. 8.4 is a new residential retirement community number. And then to also replace where it says Board of Selectmen, to replace that with Select Board throughout the zoning bylaw.
All right, is there any discussion? Is there anyone wishing to make public comment? All right, will someone, I would ask for a motion to recommend.
So moved. I make a motion that we recommend to FinCom for favorable action, Article 5, as laid out by Abby.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Paff?
Yes.
And Ms. Conant is not here. Mr. Gotti?
Yes.
Mr. McCusker?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so that's recommended. Are there any other, there are no other articles for the public hearing, correct?
Right, no more.
We can make a motion to continue this public hearing to the FinCom meeting, which is on March 8th.
Yes,
7th.
Monday, yep, sorry, Monday, March 8th at 7 p.m. on Zoom.
So moved.
Second.
It's a motion and a second, and we'll roll call vote. Mr. Paff?
Yes.
Mr. Gotti?
Yes.
Mr. McCusker?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So the public hearing is continued to the FinCom meeting. All right, the only other item on the agenda was meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or updates to the meeting minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
What were the dates again? Sorry, I don't have them in front of me.
It was the February 2nd meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our February 2nd meeting as submitted.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Mr. Paff?
Yes.
Mr. Gotti?
Yes.
Mr. McCusker?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So those meeting minutes are approved. Earlier in the discussion, I mentioned the memo, that the legal memo about the basis for the need, the implications of the medical use zoning. And it's not really part of the public hearing, but I wondered if would we as a board like to make that document publicly available?
I'm good with that.
I haven't read it in a while, but I don't have a problem with it. I don't think.
Thought it was very sound legal opinion. I'm fine with it.
All right.
Make a motion, we release copy of the said document.
A second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Mr. Paff,
Yes.
Mr. Gotti,
Yes.
Mr. McCusker,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Is there any further business this evening?
Just, sorry, actually, just a reminder, if you haven't signed the A&R from last week, if you stop by the police station to sign that, please. Thanks.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion to adjourn. Mr. Paff,
Yes.
Mr. Gotti,
Yes.
Mr. McCusker.
Yes.
I vote yes as well, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.